All flights are now boarding. Welcome to Indie Game International.
GrimTalin, please say hello to my audience, and if you wouldn't mind, could you give us the elevator pitch for the game, The Adventures of Elena Temple?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be in this podcast. And The Adventures of Elena Temple is a monochrome platformer that simulates sort of what it was like to be a gamer back in the 80s. It's basic, so to speak, on a gameplay level, as in, similar to how games were back then. They didn't have very complex mechanics or systems or sprawling narratives or, super immersive visuals. But they were damn fun. And that's what I wanted to recreate with Elena Temple, a game that's, simple in mechanics, but I use them in ingenious ways, so to speak, and to get that level of fun that I remember fondly from when I was a young kid trying simple games and thinking they were like so immersive, even though they weren't, looking back now.
Can you explain that term monochromatic?
Oh, yeah. So it's basically black and white, but depending on what virtual console, as they are called inside the game, you're using, they can change. So instead of black and white, it could be green and black, or white and black inverted, or blue and black, and so on. So basically, monochrome kind of means it's just black and another color.
Okay. I am a longtime gamer, but I'm also learning. Like, I don't really know how most of the terms. So that's why I love interviewing game developers, because you guys know so much and you can educate me. Like, I had no idea that was a reference to the visuals.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sure.
So my question is, where did your love for video games start? Because playing this game, Elena Temple, it is clear that it was made by someone who loves gaming, and clearly old games from the 80s. So where did it all start for you?
I was quite young, but I got to say this. I grew up in Romania, so Eastern Europe, and it was post-communist era. We didn't have access to many things. We didn't have access to consoles or anything. But when I was a kid, I don't really remember the age. I remember my brother, who is almost 5 years older than me, brought home, he loaned, it was like a home computer, they were called back then. So it wasn't really a console, but it was kind of a console, because it was a Russian knockoff of a Sinclair, the Sinclair console. It was a Russian knockoff of that, and you used to load game into it using audio cassettes. You placed them in a cassette player, and then you heard this very weird sound for like half an hour, and then your game was loaded if something didn't go wrong in the meantime, and you could finally see like a very pixelated splash image, and very basic graphics with very few colors. And I remember I was so fascinated with that thing, with seeing those games finally booted up, and I could walk around or do whatever. And it all started for me back then. And a few years later, we finally managed to buy an actual computer. I think it was a 386 or something like that. So it was something very basic and, with poor performance. But we were so happy because we finally had something to play on, and, to try various computer stuff. But, as a kid, mostly to play on. And I also remember I was playing a game called Superplex. And I was, again, so fascinated with that game that when I wasn't playing, and at some point I went to my grandparents for vacation, I used to design levels on math paper for that game, just because I was so fascinated with that world. And I didn't have any way to actually take those levels and, put them in the game. Like, you can do today for some games. No, I just did it for the fun of it. So yeah, it really started for me very young, and then it just continued as much as possible.
Okay, that's fascinating. It's funny because one of my questions was going to be like a game like Elena Temple is very maze like, and I was wondering, you must design it like visually first, correct? Before you start like coding anything. Is that true?
Not necessarily. So, like the process for this was, I knew I wanted to make a pixel art platform. Right? That's kind of where it all started. And I knew I wanted to be monochrome. So, I started with the prototype where I had the basic mechanics of walking, jumping, and shooting and all that. And then I started to think the mechanics, the actual mechanics. Like I implemented the coins, the pots that you shoot to get coins out of, and enemies like the scorpion and whatnot. So once I had a few of these basic mechanics, then I started to actually design the rooms in the dungeon. So I sort of split my map in 4 main areas. And once I had like 4 or something basic mechanics, I started to design rooms for one of that area. And then when I was done with that, I started to design and implement a few other mechanics, like 3 or 4 more mechanics. And then I designed another chunk of the map and so on. So I didn't design the dungeon like, to design it on paper first in its entirety and then put it in the game. It was a very iterative process.
Interesting. I love asking a question, assuming that I know the answer and then finding out that I'm totally wrong. It's so much more fascinating that way. So tell me, how did you get into developing games? Like I know you told me you were designing them on paper when you were a kid, but like, when did it become, maybe tell us a story of like maybe your career of how you went from thinking about doing this to actually doing it.
Well, I'm gonna try to be short. I'm not making any promises that I can, but I'm gonna try to keep it as short as possible. So when I was like, I think 10 or more, I went to a few classes of a computer course where they taught us very, very, very basic programming, but it was really, really basic, and that was kind of what introduced me to the programming world. And after that, I couldn't keep going to those classes for whatever reasons. But I remember that after that, it was pretty clear for me and my mom also that was kind of the path I want to take to go to a high school that focused on, math and programming and science and computer science and all that. And so I did that, and I took my lessons there very, very seriously. And I started to design very simple games with a friend of mine, a colleague and friend from school. And we made like 4 of these little games that were lost in time, which I regret deeply today that I don't have access to those very simple games I made in high school. But it was very common back then because drive space was so limited, and you wanted to install a game. What do I delete? Man, I'm never going to need to see this game I made a few years from now. So let me just delete it, which is really dumb, but that's what kids do. And then I went to computer science in college, and then I got a job making mobile games, and I stayed in that job for 10 years. And then I said I was doing decently well financially, meaning I had some savings, and I knew I could support myself for a few years. And I said, okay, this is probably the best time I'm going to get in this life to actually try going indie and try to making some games and a tiny business on my own. And so I did that, and I'm here 3.5 years later, and I hope I can keep going for a few more years. So that's pretty much what my career looked like so far.
Well, that's very interesting. And no, that wasn't too long of a story. I love details. And so thank you for getting into that. So I'm curious now, especially because you mentioned your mom, how much of the developer within Elena Temple like how much of that is based on real life? Like, is the developer who made Elena Temple within the game, The Adventures of Elena Temple, that's completely fictitious, right?
It is. I mean, it's definitely not me. I had that support, especially of my mom and all that. But it's sort of fictitious and not really, in the sense that developer is kind of your average indie developer that doesn't maybe really get the support of his family or peers, or that don't think that game development and gaming are, something that you should pursue in life, and they find it to be kind of shallow activities and whatnot. And I had friends and colleagues at work that their parents were asking them, okay, so when are you going to get a real job? And these were guys with a lot of experience. They were seniors at their art, in art and in programming. I was lucky not to have, this kind of parents, but I had met a lot of cases where that was the case. And, it was also inspired from reality, or at least my expectations of how my indie career game would go when I started making the game. So I was expecting the game to be a total fiasco and to maybe give it another try with another game and then just call it quits. So that was the part from the game where the developer moves back to his parents' garage. So I sort of imagined that was what my indie career would be like. But fortunately, it wasn't exactly like that. Right. I had a decent, a very tiny success with the Elena Temple, and I have the chance to keep on making a few more games.
That's amazing. Yeah, I remember when I booted up the game, I was obviously immediately struck by like the menu system that you're greeted with, where you see the different screens, like the different, consoles. And I read each of those paragraphs. Like I booted up the game to play a game, and yet I was completely engrossed by the little story that is told as you flip through the different systems. Did you write all that prose? Like that's all written by you?
Absolutely. And like I said, they're very inspired from like real stuff that actually happens to developers. So for example, the thing where that developer just keeps on making bad decisions and bringing his games to all the wrong consoles. So that's something that actually happens a lot, where, you're making a game and you're thinking, oh man, I'm going to release this, I don't know, maybe on, let's say, Steam or whatever. And then you release it and nothing happens. And you're like, well, this life isn't for me. Let's move on. But at the same time, if you maybe would have chosen a different platform or a different store to go to, you might have actually had a bit of success, and it would have enabled you to keep on going. So our lives as indie developers is very haunted by this kinds of decisions that, can be actually make or break for our indie career.
Yeah, it's very refreshing to read those and to realize like how actually kind of funny they are. Like it's very tongue in cheek, but at the same time, I think it's pretty obvious that it rings pretty true, and it's written by someone who knows the industry and like the hardships. But what I appreciate is that you put like a pretty funny spin on it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. That was my intention, and I'm really happy that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. I mean, the game itself is super fun, like running around the mazes and stuff, and the dungeons is fun. But I mean, before I even got in the game, I was basically enamored, if you will.
That sounds really, really good.
So tell me about, you mentioned in an email that you said the backgrounds and the music were licensed. When you say the backgrounds, do you mean like the images of the consoles?
The images of the consoles were so they're very inspired from reality.
Right.
So, for example, the Somtoy consoles, which are basically Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. Right. So I just took those and the way that those consoles look, and then I tweaked them a bit, to not go into copyright issues and whatnot. Right. And then other stuff like the displayers or monitors or whatever they're called, or the TV. those were also, I think, some of them were assets that I took from other people, who make 3D models of these sort of things. And then I took them and I also modified them a bit to fit my narrative and what I wanted in the game. But mostly what I'm referring to, the backgrounds are like the rooms that are behind the console. So those those are pictures, actual pictures. I think I got them from Shutterstock or whatever. Okay. And then I modified them a bit again to fit the game. Because first of all, I don't really have the skills to make that kind of graphics. And second of all, as an indie developer, you need to make like the best decisions that can get you to the results, in a good way and in a cheap way. So that was like the best way I could approach that, the backgrounds.
Well, you nailed it in terms of like it being immersive. I had a Game Boy. I'm not necessarily old enough to remember like the gaming that was going on in the 80s, but like the Game Boy and stuff, it's totally reminded me of me sitting on my couch when I was a kid playing Game Boy. I was like, this is just what it was like. Tell me about the music though, because the music is amazing, I have to say.
I know. Yeah. I really love that music too. And, so there's a lot of places that you can license music from, and a lot of people does that. A lot of folks do that. And then you can also hire someone to compose the music for you. But since this was my first game and I wanted quite a few tracks, and I also wanted them to be, so it's basically dynamic music. I'm going to explain that in a bit. So the best solution for me was to actually license them, and they were from the Unity asset store, where you can find all sorts of assets and music and sound libraries and all that. So basically my process was to find something that fit the game very well. And the music is actually from two different artists. And I found these artists that had music that was compatible with each other. And to go back to the part where it's dynamic, so basically, and I'm not sure even if this is something that most players notice, but for example, the music, it changes loops depending on what sort of elements are inside the room. So basically, if you're in a room with snakes, you might hear some loop that is kind of specific to the snakes. And then if you go out of the room and the moment where the loop changes, it will change to something else, like for spikes or something like that. But when you're actually in the game and you're listening, it just gives you the feeling of a continuous track, but it's not actually a continuous track. It's a track composed of different bits and put together in the game.
So did you have to make that happen? How do you make that happen in a game? Is that a complicated process?
I don't know if it's exactly a complicated process. It's just something that I could do and I wanted to do. It didn't take me an enormous amount of time, but yeah, sure, it's a bit of work. I think it probably took me like a few days or maybe a week to set up the whole system and to design that. As far as for the music itself, the music that I found that I licensed actually came in split loops, so to speak, and then I could compose them together to create this dynamic song that I was talking about.
That is so interesting. I certainly noticed that like there were certain rooms that had different music, but I did not pick up on basically what you're explaining. And when this interview is over, I'm sure that I'm going to try to play the game and try to pick up on those cues. I think that subtle stuff is very cool.
Yeah. So basically, each room has like a main theme that it will try to prioritize when it plays. So the music is made like from chunks. So when one chunk ends, then another chunk is picked, and it will try to prioritize from the main theme that room has.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, so I have a question about. This is kind of maybe a weird question. So some games I think are just, you enjoy playing them and you just want to get to the end and then you say, I beat it. But this game, for me, definitely encouraged like a 100% completion, especially because when you pause, it tells you like what you've completed and what you have left to complete. So when I felt like I'd exhausted the first area of dungeons, or the first dungeon, I guess you would call it, I then got a piece of paper and I looked at the pause screen and I realized that it was a 7x7 grid. So I drew on graph paper a 7x7 grid. And when I explored a room, because I wanted to find all the coins, when I explored a room, I was like, okay, no more coins in here. I would do a check mark. Do you think that's cheating?
No, that's definitely not cheating. That's actually something that was very common back in the day, back when I was a kid and playing games. You would very often use a piece of paper to write down various things because games weren't, systems weren't powerful enough to have complex mechanics like, dynamic maps and system with statistics and all that. But, and I don't know if you've discovered it yet, you can actually find a hidden scroll somewhere in the dungeon that can actually do that for you on the map inside the game. You can put check marks on each room that you've completed. Yeah.
So I had basically I had basically 100% of that dungeon. And then I found that scroll and it told me that it would check them off. So I basically just checked my work. And I did 100% complete that dungeon. And I had so much fun doing it. And basically, I had no idea that that's how people played back in the day. So I guess like this is one of the reasons that this game is so good and so amazing, is because without telling me to do that, the way your game is set up, I just did it anyway. I basically, your attempt to emulate what was done back in the day translated to the player. Like the developer, you taught me without words to play the game the way people played games in the style of the game that you made. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And I just want to say I'm so super happy that you actually did that. Like you actually took a piece of paper and you actually wrote down, and you're not the only one. I have had various people tell me that maybe they didn't use a piece of paper. Maybe they started composing the dungeon. They took screenshots of each room when they composed the dungeons themselves and all that. And that was so fascinating to me. It was like when you make the game, you kind of hope for how players will approach it. But most often than not, they don't do that because a lot of players maybe are too used with how we game these days, where we have every kind of system that we can imagine already in the game, and all sorts of helpers and all sorts of hints and all that. But then it was actually my goal to make this experience like as simple as it was back then, and to see if players would actually still enjoy that. And much to my surprise, it really did. So it really resonated with players. And like you said, not necessarily only players that used to game like this back then, but also younger players that actually felt that this was very close to what gaming would have been like back then. So that was a very nice achievement for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I want to emphasize, is that basically the first gaming system I ever owned was a PlayStation back in 1999. So, and it's amazing too, because people say these days, and I agree to a certain degree, that video games these days, especially like AAA video games, like hold the player's hand and tell you how to do everything. They walk you through everything. And I agree to a certain extent, and some games do it more than others, but it never occurred to me that it really is like that, because back in the day you had to draw it yourself. Like the game basically employed you to draw your own map, whereas now maps are in 3D. They show you little markers of where to go, like quest markers and stuff. So it's so cool it's like a time machine, man. You made a time machine. It's very, very cool.
Thank you.
So I have a question about your Twitter. And this question might be misguided, but I'm just very curious. So I found out about your game via the YouTube channel Switch Up, which is all about like Nintendo Switch games, and they do every week they have what games are on sale and like what you should buy and what you shouldn't buy. You know what I mean? And so that's where I discovered Elena Temple. They mentioned that it was really cheap. I had never heard of it. I saw the screenshots and the dude talked about it, and so I bought it. But he mentioned that on your Twitter, you had said that something about if people bought like X amount of games, you would make X amount of profit. And I'm wondering if you do you ever tweet in the character of the developer within Elena Temple?
Oh, no, absolutely not. So the Twitter account is 100% my actual thoughts and dumb things to say. So they're actually me. If I say something dumb there, that's me. That's never in character. Okay.
I was just curious because I don't know. It was something about the way the guy described it. I don't have Twitter, but so I'm wondering about do you have control over when your game goes on sale on certain consoles?
So the game is available on Steam, Switch, and Xbox, and on all of them, it's me who decides, at least to a major extent, when that happens. So there are some sort of limitations, as in I can't put the game on sale too often or for too long. So there are rules for each console and each platform. But basically, it's me who decides, okay, I want to make a sale happen, and it's going to be either now, if that's possible, or the first slot available whenever the platform holders tell me that I can schedule it.
Okay, is that a developer decision or a publisher decision?
Well, since I'm both, it's a publisher decision.
Okay, like I said, I'm completely ignorant about indie game development, and I just want to learn. So I'm just so curious. So tell me about the publishing side. You said you published Elena Temple yourself?
Yeah, so the games that I develop, I publish them myself. Well, at least it was the case until now, and it's probably going to be the case for like the next game or next few games. That doesn't mean that if I somehow find a good partner that I think can actually bring value to the game and to the whole process, I wouldn't say yes. But so far, I have self-published my game, and I'm very comfortable doing that. As in, I spent a lot of time and I learned the quirks of each platform and how to streamline that process and how to make sure you don't have too many rejections. There are a lot of steps that you must go through, and so I'm quite okay. And that's why I also started to help out other developers. Not too many so far, but you got to start somewhere. I've helped them also publish their games because either they didn't have a dev kit or they didn't have the experience to make the port from their PC game to the console. And so I did help them with that and all the publishing process and all the approvals and all the, everything that this publishing stuff entails. Also the sales and all that, that's mostly me that decides. But of course, always with prior agreement from the developer that they want me to handle that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Okay, it's very interesting. Everyone that I've interviewed so far have not been the publisher, and so I just love getting other perspectives and other like ways of navigating the indie game industry. So that's very cool. Thank you for expanding upon that. So tell me about your newest or your most recent game. Would that be Last Days of Lazarus?
That's the one that I'm working now. I've recently released long ago a puzzle tale, so which obviously it's a puzzler, and it's again available on Steam, Switch, and Xbox One. And as for Last Days of Lazarus, this is something that the developer, Darkania Works, which is incidentally also a solo developer. And he has been working on this game for almost 2 years now. But I was with him almost from the start. He's a local developer from here, and we meet up regularly and talk over coffee and whatnot. So I've been pretty close, and I did tell him that if he needs my help, I will help him publish the game, and I help them with various suggestions and whatnot. But at some point, we did come to the agreement that I will also help him with part of the development and to help him improve everything that's related to the user experience and to go over the game design and all that. And I think it's a very fruitful collaboration, and I'm super, super happy with how the game is turning out. We initially thought we would release last year, but a lot of stuff happened, and I did have some health issues myself too, and it's been a complicated year all around for all of us, hasn't it?
Right.
So we had to delay, and we also took the decision that we want to invest a bit more time and to make sure the game comes out really great, and all the experience overall is really nice, and it really empowers the narrative that he is so good at making and all the world building that he did and all that.
Yeah.
So I will be publishing that so we're going to start with Steam, and then we're going to go to either Switch or Xbox. We'll see how things go. And then finally, we'll see if we can also maybe bring it to PlayStation 2 at some point.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're curious, it's on the GrimTalin website, and it looks really, really cool. I don't know much about it beyond what you've told me and what's here, but like visually, like you said, the world building, it looks like there's some sci-fi horror happening. It looks very, very cool. Yeah,
so the game is like horror, although it's very strongly put horror. It's more like a psychological thriller or something, adventure game. So it's mostly focused on narrative and the simple puzzles and all the story and the characters and this mystery, because Lazarus is kind of a shady person who comes back to his sister after their mother has died under suspicious circumstances. And when he comes back home, his sister isn't there to wait for him. And then he just keeps on jumping from story twist to story twist, trying to figure out what's going on and trying to dig up more of his family's past, and especially what happened with his father that abandoned them when they were kids. And you go through this mystery game and try to figure out how everything pieces together.
Yeah, it looks very cool. And are you currently based in Romania?
Yep. Yes, I've always worked from here. Yeah.
Very cool. It's just funny when you learn about people and then you look at their work, you're like, oh, that makes sense, because it says set in a post-Soviet Eastern Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that George from Darkania Works, he does this really, really well. So he actually takes so much inspirations from our past and from our local setting and all that. And I'm so proud to be able to work with him on this game, which, like you said, is so inspired from things. It was uncanny. So for the first time when he gave me the prototype, for a first build to play, and I was in that apartment where we start the game, and I was like, oh my God, this is so uncanny. This is like my childhood, but in a much darker and twisted version of it. But it was so weird for me to experience that place, because it was so grounded from our weird reality.
Yeah, that's very cool, because people often look to literature or highbrow film that you could learn about other cultures or other parts of the world, and here we are. This is an indie video game that will give you a perspective that I've never really been given, I don't think, ever. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
So one question that I ask any indie dev that I get on my show is, what is release day like for an indie video game?
Oh man, release day. Well, let's see. So everything usually is put in place, as in you get all the approvals and everything, at least a few weeks earlier. And you will have likely also had a pre-order period if you opted to, but I totally recommend everyone does that for at least a week or maybe more. So, there should already be a little buzz around the game before a release day. And then when release day comes, it's mostly just replying to people and answering mails and the Twitter messages and all that. And, commenting on whatever posts you're lucky to have people write about your game. So yeah, it's really fun. It's probably one of the best days because, on one hand, you've kind of sort of finished the game and it's there and it's live and it's in people's hands and it's material, so to speak. But at the same time, you don't have to worry yet if it's actually successful or not. You don't have access to any kind of sales data yet. So you can just really enjoy that day and talking to people who are actually trying it, or to members of the press who want to, they want a code to review it, or maybe they are already releasing their review if you sent them a code earlier. So it's a very nice experience, especially if the reviews are decently good. If you have bad reviews, I imagine it's not such a great experience. But I've been lucky so far that my reviews were at least decent. They were good, or if they critiqued something about my game, it was something it was something that I agreed with. So yeah, for me it was really, really nice. Each release day is really nice for me. It's a nice experience.
Very cool. And when you released it in 2019, correct?
So, are you referring to Elena Temple?
Yes.
Yeah, Elena Temple was released in 2018. So on Steam in March, on Switch in May. And then I released on Xbox in 2019.
Okay. Why is it not on PlayStation?
Oof, that's a very painful question for me.
Okay.
So it's very painful because I've been trying to put it on PlayStation for so long, but I just can't seem to find the time to actually invest into porting the game. So it's, go through all the documentation and all that. So I do have the dev kits. I've been registered with them for from 2018, actually. I've been registered with them. It seems like it's always, I have something else to do and something that can actually, come to a conclusion faster. And it was either publish some other developer's game, or then I really needed to continue work on my game, on the puzzler game I mentioned earlier. And then I really needed to work with George and to help him finish up all this game and wrapping it up and developing. So at some point, I do hope I will find a solution to bring my games to PlayStation 2, but so far it hasn't happened, and it's all my fault.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate. Do you do all the porting yourself?
Yeah.
Is that common in the indie industry?
I really don't know if it's that common. I mean, definitely there are a lot of developers that do that, but I also know a lot of developers who either prefer working with, like they do with me, with a partner who pours their games or maybe even publishes them, or with an actual publisher who also helps with the porting and maybe with funds and, big marketing campaigns or whatnot. Or they maybe go to publishing houses, porting houses. There are these sort of studios that only focus on porting other people's games, and they're not involved in the publishing process after that.
Okay. And what was the puzzle game you mentioned that you made that's also available on Switch?
So it's called Long Ago, a Puzzle Tale. It's on Switch, Steam, and Xbox. And it's this. So it's a puzzler where you combine like the story of a modern fairy tale told in rhyme, with lots of puzzle mechanics that you just keep uncovering as you go along, as you progress along. It's fully voice acted. It has 5 chapters, each with its own visual theme. So you have like summer forests, or mountain forests at night, or the desert, or towns and whatnot. It's designed to be this very relaxing experience. So, with beautiful music and warm visuals and a very helpful hint system that makes sure that you never get stuck for too long on a puzzle. So I wanted to eliminate this frustration that usually happens when you play puzzle games, where if you find a level that you just can't figure out the solution to, most of the time you're just stuck, unless of course you go to Google and try to find the solution. But I wanted to avoid that. I wanted to avoid the player to have to go, to leave the game and go someplace else to find the solution. I wanted to implement a system that can give you hints. So it gives you move by move solutions. So you don't actually need to see the entire solution. You can actually see 1 or 2 or 3 moves and then try to figure out yourself how to carry on.
Very cool. I only, probably since maybe 2016 or 17 did I become like a true puzzle gamer. Like I never really liked them, or I guess I never really gave them the chance. But then all of a sudden I discovered how cool they are, and I love puzzle games. So I am definitely going to be buying that game on my Switch. So I guess I don't really have any more questions. This has been awesome. I have loved everything that you've shared with me and my audience. Do you have anything else you want to say about indie gaming, about Elena Temple, or anything in general you want to share?
So first of all, I want to thank you for having me, and it's been really fun to talk a bit about my experiences, and I hope I didn't stutter too much, because I know I do have that tendency when I get excited and try to tell a story. I kind of get in my own way at some point. So sorry if that happened too often. As for indie gaming, it's really awesome for a very tiny developer like myself to actually talk to people and to actually have people like you who describe, like you did before, they describe, how much they enjoyed it, or a feeling that they got out of those games. And that is such an amazing feeling. And it's sort of, I know it sounds corny, but it is what keeps us indie developers alive, because a lot of the times sales and money that we make from these small games that we make is not that much. And we do go through, failures and complicated processes, and doing everything by yourself or with a very small team is, you can stumble a lot. So, when we do hear words of appreciation, it really matters more than most people realize. So I'm really grateful for that.
Well, you're very welcome. I just want to say, I guess, one more time that I absolutely love Elena Temple. And if you're listening, you should definitely go check it out on Xbox, Steam, or Switch. And you did not, I don't think you started at all when you were talking about anything. And I commend you for speaking more than one language, because I can only speak one language. So in no way do I think it is a fault. And I love your story. So thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure.
Well, that wraps up the episode. One more big, huge thank you to GrimTalin. Grab The Adventures of Elena Temple on PC, Switch, and Xbox. Links to purchase will be in the show notes. I simply cannot say enough good things about this game. Find GrimTalin on Twitter and Instagram at GrimTalin. That is GrimTalin. And on the web at GrimTalin.com. You can find me on Twitter at IndieGameINTL, and you can email me if you have a suggestion for an amazing guest, or if you want to sponsor this podcast, you can email me at sumadrepodcasts@gmail.com. That's SUMADRE podcasts, plural, @gmail.com. Okay, tune in 2 episodes from now to get the scoop on GrimTalin's most recent game, Long Ago, A Puzzle Tale, which is excellent, by the way. Also, I have already recorded the interview with George from Darkania Works, so that is coming at you very soon as well. All right, thanks to GrimTalin, thanks to you for listening, and peace out.